Since Russia invaded Ukraine, oil prices have been surging. Leading industrial nations now want to tap their oil reserves to mitigate the situation for consumers and companies. The International Energy Agency wants to release 60 million barrels of crude oil reserves. That's about 4% of all emergency reserves of 1.5 billion barrels. Meanwhile, Western oil companies continue to scale down their operations in Russia. Italy's Eni now joining Shell and BP. For more, let's bring in DW's Ashutosh Pandey, who has his eyes on the crude market. Ashutosh, oil and gas trade has been left out of sanctions by the West so far. Why are prices still rising?
Well, Chris, a lot of is to do with what traders are calling self-sanctioning. So the market participants, the buyers of oil, shippers, they are staying away from Russian oil for different reasons. Some are doing it because they don't want any sort of a reputational damage. Some are doing it on moral grounds. And some are precisely doing it on the fact that they don't want to be seen on the wrong side of sanctions. So that is a major factor that is driving the prices higher, because even when Russian oil is at a massive discount to the Brent benchmark, still there are few takers for the Russian oil. And the shippers who are ready to ship the Russian oil are asking for huge premium.
Now, the United States and dozens of other countries have decided to release 60 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves. Why hasn't this helped much?
Because it's just not enough, right? I mean, we are seeing at a disruption of far more barrels than what this release would actually bring to the market. So if you do the maths, it's like 60 million barrels over 30 days would be 2 million barrels. It's a finite stockpile. We are looking at an open-ended crisis that could last longer. So clearly, it's not giving enough confidence to traders out there.
And if we take a look at OPEC and other major producers, they're mainly in for higher revenue thanks to high prices, or what's the game here?
Absolutely. They are making hay while the sun shines, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These are the countries that still have spare capacity, but they are not yet pumping in more oil. They're sticking to the 400,000 barrels per day. We know that many of the oil producers are struggling to even reach that 400,000 barrels of oil per day of additional supply. But these two players have major spare capacity, but they are staying put because for Saudi Arabia per se, it's adding a lot to its coffers, a lot of US dollars, money that it needs to diversify away from oil.
And of course, there has been talk about how these high prices for energy could actually fuel the transition away from these sources of energy. But could an oil price at around $119 per barrel, as we're seeing it right now, actually hurt this transition more than it helps?
Yeah, upfront, it will. In the medium term, definitely it will hurt. I will tell you why. Because see, higher prices, firstly, are supposed to encourage people to move to electric vehicles. They'll make electric vehicles more attractive. That's one. Then there's a lot of this whole amount of money that oil companies are making. They are going to invest into renewable energies. That's the expectations. And also because the governments have actually pledged to go for carbon neutrality. However, in the short term, it's going to lead to oil companies drilling more oil. And that's going to be really bad for the transition. We might return to the days of drill, baby, drill as far as the shale gas producers are concerned. So it's going to be problematic. And that's what the environmentalists are worried about.
DW's Ashutosh Pandey, thank you. And staying with commodities, Russia and Ukraine are among the world's biggest exporters of grain. The conflict now could lead to a loss in production and canceled deliveries, with potentially grave consequences for some of the poorest regions in the world.
In war-torn Yemen, the wheat reserves will last for another couple of months, according to the government. But many, like here in the capital city of Sana'a, worry about the rising prices for flour.
The Russian war against Ukraine will affect the whole world, not just us. It'll hit imports, exports and trade. Yemen will undoubtedly be affected. We're an importer of wheat, and most of our food comes from abroad.
Lebanon says it has wheat reserves for just one more month. The country's largest silos were destroyed in an explosion in Beirut in 2020. The country depends on wheat imports, with 60% coming from Ukraine. The government is looking for options.
We've reached out to a number of countries, including the US, India, Canada and Europe, that produce the soft wheat that's needed for the Arab bread styles we produce in Lebanon. It's a very specific kind.
Turkey depends on wheat imports from Russia. The country is in the midst of an economic crisis with sky-high inflation. There have been massive protests over rising food prices. Many Turks fear that the war will make matters worse, and basic food items even more expensive.
Earlier, I spoke to Dietrich Christ. He's a consultant on farming and agriculture with a focus on Ukraine, where he also runs a farm east of Kiev. He just returned to Germany, and I asked him what his experience has been in the last days.
Yeah, the past days were very emotional. Until I heard the first bombs around Kiev, I didn't believe that this would happen. I mean, a lot of people, everybody discussed about this before, but I couldn't believe that this would happen. And only if I heard the first bombs around Kiev, I jumped in my car and escaped from Kiev. So fortunately, I brought my family already 2 weeks before to Germany. So I was alone. It makes it much easier to escape or to travel in such conditions. It took me half a day to get to the Romanian border and 16 hours to cross the Romanian border. And then from Romania, I left to Germany.
Do you know what has been happening to your farms and to your employees?
Yes, we are in permanent contact. Fortunately, all kind of messengers are working, telephone are working. So we are discussing how to save the farm, how to save the people. We paid already 2 times salaries. People have money. We we brought wheat to Kiev and brought wheat to a local mill to produce flour for local people because there was a lack of bread in our villages.
What will this conflict mean for Ukraine's agriculture sector, which is important to the country's economy?
It depends. I mean, it will suffer, of course. The question is how much, and if the conflict will, for some reason, stop very soon. So probably we can manage to have at least a minor spring season. If not, probably 60, 70, 90% of the fields wouldn't be seeded because there's lack of diesel fuel, seeds, manpower, so everything you need for successful seeding campaign.
Are you going to return to Ukraine once the fighting stops?
Yes, if there's something to return, I have a flat in Kiev, and I hope it will be still there or it will be still available when I come back. I have my work. I lived the past more than 20 years in Ukraine, so it's my children were born in Ukraine, so this is my home, my second home after Germany. So at the moment I intend to return as soon as possible, but at the moment, of course, it's not possible to go.
Farmer and agricultural consultant Dietrich Christ talking to us earlier. Now, after sanctions were levied against many Russian oligarchs, their yachts have attracted the attention of law enforcement. Some of them happen to be anchored in German shipyards, where it's anything but easy to seize them.
Luxurious yachts are a common sight in Hamburg, but these tarps cover a special one. The Dilbar, worth 800 million euros, is an especially impressive ship, as seen in this marketing clip. It belongs to Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov, who has been sanctioned by the EU. He's seen as a confidant of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Usmanov says he's been unfairly vilified and will fight the accusations. The German government had carefully planned the seizure. We have only received the exact wording of these sanctions less than 48 hours ago. We are now focused on finding ways to execute the sanctions. The goal of the EU sanctions is to limit the oligarch's economic power. Since a yacht is hardly part of a business and doesn't help it earn money, it was initially unclear whether or not it could be seized. A yacht could easily be sold any time, and in the case of the yacht in Hamburg, that could bring in up to 800 million euros. That's why I think it has to fall under the current sanctions, given that it is very much an asset that could potentially enrich someone. Authorities agreed. Another yacht left Hamburg in February after having docked there for maintenance work. The Graceful, believed to be Vladimir Putin's yacht, as it regularly anchors at his vacation spots. Just days before Russia started its war against Ukraine, the yacht left for Kaliningrad. Yachts are not the only assets Russian oligarchs hold in Germany. Near Lake Tegernsee in the south, locals gathered to protest against Usmanov. He's rumored to own this villa and likely two more close to the lake. No one knows for certain, though, not even the members of the city council. I have never seen the name Usmanov in any official documents. Usually deals are made by companies or with strawmen. Such business practices are common among oligarchs. They're used specifically to avoid sanctions. The main problem will be to prove that an oligarch is the legal owner of a property. Looking at an oligarch with potential assets, I have to have proof that those assets are really theirs. Luna is another yacht anchoring in Hamburg these days. It's also presumed to belong to an oligarch, but that one's not been sanctioned.